Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember that context is everything. Now, context is everything, isn't it? I'm reading a textbook in its entirety, cover to cover, world history, as you can tell, because I'm building my historical context because I will eventually start speaking out of my pocket, which I think means off the top of my head. Now, I'm building my historical context so that when I speak out of the top of my head, there's proof and evidence that I at least tried to develop some context before I spoke. Because there's going to be evidence of an entire textbook, world history textbook, cover to cover read. If you have a problem with that, please take it up with my attorney. We have finished up Chapter 8. We're on the Chapter 8 review, which Chapter 8 review for me is I just read you my notes. These notes are in the subheadings of each video. So you can read those, or you can listen to me read this. Chapter 8, Section 1, this is the early Middle Ages. That's the whole chapter, the early Middle Ages. But we go a little bit past it by the end, so maybe they misappropriated that. Early Middle Ages, 500 to 1000 AD. That's the early Middle Ages. This is when Europe gets its wings by way of blending Greco-Roman, Germanic, and Christian traditions, stretching beyond the Mediterranean coast into mainland Europe. Medieval, the word medieval, Middle Ages. Medieval is a Latin word, which is Middle Age, direct translation from Latin, Middle Age, right? Much of Europe outside of the Mediterranean nations were frontier land in 500 AD. Between 400 and 700, Germanic tribes carved Western Europe into many tribes, the strongest of which were the Franks. In 486, Frank King Clovis conquered Gaul. Gaul is what we know now as France. Islam is founded by Muhammad in 622 in Arabia. There's going to be a whole unit on this, so there's not a lot of detail on this founding of Islam, but obviously it's important, and they give a little footnote on it now. We'll get more to it later. Muslims began conquests of Palestine, North Africa, all the way to Spain. When they reached France, they were defeated by Charles Martel in the Battle of Tours, Tours, in 732 AD. The Christians viewed Muslims as hostile. Charlemagne, which is Charles the Great, is the grandson? Maybe I should check that up, because it might be son, it might be nephew. Charles the Great is Charlemagne, and Charlemagne is the great. Jeez Louise, that's some aggressive drilling going on over there. Charlemagne Charlemagne, 46-year rule. Let's see. Charles Martel. Grandson. Charles Martel's grandson. That is what I wrote here, and I'm correct. Charles Martel's grandson is Charlemagne, Charles the Great. He had a 46-year reign, which is around 800 AD. Doesn't give me a direct date. He fought off enemies from all sides, from like a base in France. He fought off Saxons, Muslims, Avars, Slavs, and Lombards. So his kingdom, the Charlemagne kingdom, went from France, Germany, into parts of Italy. Pretty big, about as big as an empire got since the Roman Empire. Nobles who he appointed to rule local regions would send out the Missi Dominici, who were the eyes and ears of the empire. Charlemagne received learning revived learning and education ethics, and founded the school of Achan, Aacchen, Achan, under direction of Alcuin of York, with focus on Latin tradition being grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Those are the things that he focused on because he thought Latin, Roman Empire, strength. Let's revive the strength and the work ethics of the Romans. So he did that. This tradition of education became the gold standard throughout medieval European education. After Charlemagne's death in 814, his empire split into thirds. In 843, this Treaty of Verdun really separated those into three thirds. Germany, France, and Italy. Vikings begin to enter the fray. We're not going to talk about them. I thought we were going to. We didn't. 8.2, Chapter 8.2, Feudalism and the Manor Economy. Local rule with powerful lords who divided their vast lands into lesser lords. These lesser lords were called vassals. Vassals. Pledged loyalty, these vassals pledged loyalty to their greater lords, but they could have many greater lords that they pledged loyalty, but they had undying loyalty to one lord in particular. And that's not the lord upstairs I'm talking about in a secular sense. They had loyalty to their liege lord. Their liege. That's when you hear the term, my liege. My liege. This is their lord that they have full responsibility towards, because I'm guessing they gave them power, or gave them their land. Feudal contract is what it's called. Divided lands were called fiefs or estates. So a fiefdom would be a small thing, castle, small manor, surrounding farmlands, and whatever economy goes on within that. It's all one thing. Knights were nobles who did rigorous training from the age of 7 on. They were an honor-based society, the knights. They would even respect rival knights by letting them armor up, even if they caught them off guard. So there was no really catching them off guard. They had the respect to one another that they would not engage in knightly combat without both being in full regalia. They had an honor for women, which is still known today as chivalry, and that's where it started, the knights. That term, at least. Castles were strongholds with a keep, and a keep would often be separated away from the rest of the building structure with a moat, which is like a dugout thing of water, a little bit of extra obstacle to get to the keep. Women had substantial rights for this time. Manor was the lord's estate. Peasant life was hard, and life expectancy was around 35. Peasants would work and give taxes to their local lords for protection in times of conflict and guaranteed homesteading. Everyone worked and got a week off for Christmas and Easter. Most peasants would never venture more than a few miles out of their fief for the entirety of their life. Wow. This better be a nice sandwich shop that's getting built underneath us, because that is a lot of drilling. Chapter 8.3, Medieval Church. Charlemagne waged war in the name of Christianity. In 597, this is after Charlemagne, or before Charlemagne, Pope Gregory I sent Augustine to convert Anglo-Saxons in England. Sacraments were needed for salvation, so excommunication on the individual and the interdict on a whole town were threats of power that the church held. They could say, you're excommunicated. That means you can't go to heaven, to a person. And if, like, there's a lord that's, like, giving them a problem, the church, they can say to the Lord, we're going to excommunicate your whole town. We're going to do the interdict on them and get you out of here. You're not going to heaven. None of you. So it's a threat, a power. Benedictine rule. Monk named Benedict organized a monastery at Monte Cassino in South Italy with 3-vow rule. Obedience to the, what were they called? The obedience to the, you have the guy who's the leader of the monks, and you have the lady that's the leader of the nuns. They had different names, and it was something else. What was it? I'll see it here. These are rules for monks in the monastery, abbot and abbess. The church not only was the spiritual center of medieval Europe, but it was also the secular center because of arts and general education. Popes wielded power for excommunication and interdict over the secular kings. This was called papal supremacy. The church slowed feudal warfare in the 1100s, a time known as Peace of God. In 1073, Pope Gregory VII outlawed priestly marriage and the selling of church offices, or simony. Also, the church, not kings, would appoint church officials. In the early 1200s, Francis of Assisi created the Franciscans. Francis was a roving monk, which is called a friar, meaning that he was walking town to town doing his thing, not in a convent or a monastery, rather. St. Dominic created the Dominicans, which was based on like creating the strong education for basics of the faith. Chapter 8.4, medieval economic expansion. More heavy-duty plows were crafted in northern Europe, for the soil was tougher than the Mediterranean soils that the metal plows were originally invented for. Windmills were invented to grind grain into flour when there was no strong running water present in a town. 3-field farming, where legumes were used to restore the soil in one field. Grains were grown in another field, and another field was left wild. And on an annual rotation, this would keep the soil fresh. Common Asian trading for fine silks, metal, jewelry, and Asian spices was happening. Trade fairs happened, but would stop by the autumn because the roads became impassable. Some of these cities that held these fairs had 10,000 people up to 100,000 people populations. Expanded agriculture damaged the feudal economy, the feudal system, because money was more common and allowed for rent to be paid via money rather than via labor, which opens up a whole world of possibilities. The middle class emerged because of it. The middle class were merchants, traders, and artisans between high nobles, clergy, and low peasants. So the middle class, a new thing. In the middle class, guilds, early workers' unions, supported artisans and would even support old or injured members or dead members' families. Apprentices in a guild would start around age 7, common theme. Journeymen were the general workers who were salary workers. Women were very active in guilds. At one point in Frankfurt, Germany, 1/3 of all guilds were entirely women. That's all we have for this. Thank you for your patience with the drilling. And next chapter, well, book just closed. I'm not going to tell you. It's a surprise. Tune in. John Michael Monroy, context is everything. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Always remember, context is everything.